The electronics manufacturing industry is often explained through labels like OEM, ODM, and EMS. But the problem here is that these terms are inconsistent across industries and their definitions themselves have evolved over time. Therefore, different people might use the same term to describe completely different roles in the value chain. That is why discussions around electronic manufacturing often become very confusing. So, I think a better way to understand the industry is to stop thinking in terms of these labels, these terms, and instead think in terms of the processes involved in the development of these electronic products. Now, before I continue, I should clarify what I mean by electronic products. So, when I say electronic products, I broadly mean two categories of products: consumer products and enterprise products. So, consumer products are very easy to recognize. Those are products like laptops, PCs, smartphones, earbuds, smart watches, home appliances, and any other consumer electronic gadgets. Enterprise products, on the other hand, might include products like a power inverter, a motor drive, a PLC, or maybe a EV battery management system. So things that are used at an enterprise and industrial level. So in case of consumer electronics, the end consumer is usually an individual consumer buying the finished product like a smartphone or a laptop. And on the other hand, in case of the industrial electronics, the customer is usually another business, maybe a factory owner, an utility operator, an automaker, and so on. So the products are often not standalone devices in case of industrial products, but it might be systems, subsystems, controllers, or modules that are used inside the industrial infrastructure. So, as I've just explained, it could be a device like a motor drive that may be used in a manufacturing plant to regulate the speed and torque of a industrial motor, or it could be a PLC, a programmable logic controller that may be used inside an automobile factory to control the robotic assembly lines and so on. So I hope you get the idea about when I say electronics products. Could be consumer or could be enterprise. Now, whether it's a consumer product or whether it's a industrial product, every electronics product that I mentioned earlier, all of them goes through a series of stages before it reaches the final customer. And different companies participate in different stages of this chain. Now, once those stages are understood clearly, the roles of EMS, ODMs, OEMs, or brand owners, suppliers, etc., all of these different players, the roles and their roles, will be much easier to understand. So, let's begin with this stage one, which is product strategy and market definition. So the whole process begins with the product strategy and market definition. This is where the company decides what kind of products it wants to build, which is, for example, which customer segment it wants to target, and what competitive position it wants to occupy. A company like Apple, for example, may decide to build a premium smartphone with a lot of focus on ecosystem integration and a premium user experience. Some other brand, like say Xiaomi, may target aggressive pricing for mid-range smartphones. So, two different companies with two different strategies. If you look at earbuds, we might have companies in India like Boat. They focus on affordable audio products for the younger consumers in India. So, broadly, the same strategy regarding the product design, the product strategy, and market definition is used in the industrial setting as well. Now, so far at this stage, no manufacturing has happened yet. The company is defining the commercial idea behind the product in this stage. So it is deciding the target customer, the expected pricing, the feature set, the product roadmap, the distribution strategy, the brand positioning, and so on. So in case of most consumer electronics industries, the company controlling this stage, the stage 1, is usually called the brand owner. So these are companies like Apple, Dell, Lenovo, Xiaomi, etc. So the brand owner owns the product strategy, it owns the customer relationship, and controls the commercial direction of the product. So that's their main strength. So now let's move on to stage 2, which is product design. So the next stage is product design and systems engineering. So this is where the actual products begins to take shape. Here the engineers decide how the device will work, what components will be used in the manufacturing of the device, how the internal architecture will be organized, and how the hardware and software will interact with each other. So these kind of decisions are made at this stage too. For example, for a smartphone, this includes decisions such as the display size, the battery capacity, the camera layout, the thermal management, the PCB layout, the antenna placement, the operating system integration, and so on. Similarly, if you look at a smart TV, so the tasks at the stage 2 might include like what display technology to use, what audio systems to use, the operating system integration, connectivity features, the enclosure design, and so on. So this stage creates much of the product's intellectual property or the IP. So for high-end products, this step is done mostly by the brand owners themselves. Most of it, I'm not saying 100%, but most of it is done by the brand owners themselves. Apple is the clearest example. Apple controls the design, the software integration, the ecosystem design, the chip selection, the user interface, and so on. But when you come to mid to low tier products like budget earphones or smartwatches, or maybe even lower tier smartphones, in that case a single company may design the product, and after the designing phase is over, they will also manufacture the product, which is not the case for like premium products like Apple. So Apple definitely designs, it does the stage 2 thing, product design, but it doesn't manufacture the product. And I'll come to manufacturing in stage 3, but for now let's focus on the product design part. So as I was saying, for mid to lower tier products, manufacturing and design might be done by the same company. These companies are called as ODMs, original design manufacturers, because they do not only design the product, but they also manufacture them as well. So in case of ODMs, once what happens is that the brand owner then takes the end product provided by the ODMs, and then they put on their branding, their logos, and then go through the marketing and distribution process. So in this case, the brand owner is neither involved in the design process. When I say not involved, I do not mean they are not involved 100%. They might have some inputs, but most of the design as well as the manufacturing is done by the ODMs themselves. So the brand owners themselves are mostly focused on the marketing, the distribution, and maybe some surface level in terms of the product design and so on, but not too much. It's mostly done by the ODMs. Now we come to stage 3, which is manufacturing and assembly. This is manufacturing and assembling the product. So once once the product design is done, the next stage involves manufacturing and product integration. This is where EMS companies become important. EMS stands for Electronics Manufacturing Services, and these companies specialize in physically building the electronics products which were designed by the firms in stage 2. So their works might include PCB assembly, SMT placement, soldering, enclosure assembly, testing, quality control, calibration, packaging, and so on. Some EMS companies might also help with procurement and logistic coordination. So some important companies, notable companies in this stage, in the manufacturing stage, includes Foxconn at the global level, and if we talk about India, we have companies like Dixon Technologies, Keynes Technology, and Syrma SGS Technology. Now, the critical point to note is that the EMS companies usually do not own the end product or the core IP of the product that they're manufacturing, because they are the manufacturing specialists. They're not the design specialists. So their expertise lies in the factory operations, the process engineering, and in some cases it could be component sourcing as well. But mostly it's about large scale manufacturing execution. That's their expertise. Also, the EMS companies do not, for the most part, build the components themselves. By components, I mean the sensors, the displays, the batteries, speakers, GPS modules, whatever goes inside in creating the final electronics product. The smartphone, the earbuds requires all these things. The smartphone will require batteries, displays. So even these batteries and displays are not manufactured by the EMS companies. Those are again sourced from somewhere else. So there are two ways this might happen. Obviously, it might be that for the higher end products like Apple's smartphones or maybe higher end laptops, this what happens is that just a minute, let me just figure it out. Okay, so in terms of as I was saying, in terms of higher end products like an Apple smartphone, what happens is that the suppliers are nominated by the brand owner themselves. So the brand owner, like for example the Apple themselves, will tell the EMS that we are going to source the processors from specific place, the screens from a specific supplier. These decisions are not made by the EMS themselves. So the suppliers are nominated by Apple themselves. But if we talk about the lower end products, in that case the brand owner doesn't do much, and so the EMS themselves procures all the components required to manufacture the product. So if we talk about some low end smartwatch or maybe a low end earbud, so in that case the EMS makes the decisions themselves, and probably most likely in in some cases the sourcing responsibilities are shared. Maybe certain components are simple enough, it doesn't make a difference, so the EMS might do it themselves, but certain components might be necessary, so the brand owners will tell the EMS like, we are going to tell you which supplier to buy to get these components from. So again, it depends from product to product basis how they procure the components for the product. So different suppliers specialize in different parts of these stacks, because the modern electronics products are built from highly specialized components which are manufactured by different companies around the world. So Sony Corporation supplies the image sensors. Samsung Electronics supplies the display, the memory components. So again, different companies specialize in different parts uh, of the components, and they supply their respective components. Now, when it comes to ODMs, which I mentioned in stage 2, these companies do not hand over their manufacturing to EMS, because as I've said, they are both the designers as well as the manufacturers. So obviously they won't outsource it to an EMS. So as the name says, they are original design manufacturers. So they manufacture their own product which they have designed. So what an ODM does is that it develops reusable product platforms like low budget earbuds, smart watches, etc., that can later be customized at the surface level and, and sold under different brand names. So one of the things to note about ODMs is that for the most part, the products that they have designed and manufactured are not sold under their own names. So they are sold under the names of the brand owners who buys this generic product from them and then does the marketing, labeling, branding, and some surface level changes, customization in the product experience. So the product for the most part are not sold under the name of the ODM. Now for certain devices like laptops, monitors, and networking equipment, and low to mid tier consumer electronics, there is a tighter collaboration between the manufacturer and the brand owner when it comes to the design of the product. So, for example, while designing a laptop, the manufacturing company, that is an ODM, may design and manufacture the laptop's motherboard and the chassis platform, while the brand owner, like an HP or a Dell or a Lenovo, they customize the software, the branding, and they also decide which specific processors to use, whether to use an AMD or an Intel, etc., or maybe which memories to use from which brand. So the brand owner decides those kind of things. So, for example, companies like Quanta Computer and Compal Electronics are classic examples of such ODMs. So, laptop brand owners like HP, Dell, and Lenovo work closely with them. Therefore, the design IP is held both by the brand owners as well as the ODMs, and then it's manufactured by the ODM, which in the case of laptops are Quanta Computer and Compal Electronics. So to summarize, what I'm trying to say is that in the manufacturing phase and the design phase, what happens is that for certain products, even for certain higher end products, sometimes parts of the design is also done by the manufacturers themselves. As I've just said, for laptops, it's not like that HP or a Dell or a Lenovo does 100% of the design and then they ship it to the manufacturer and simply tell it to manufacture. No, it's not like that. For laptop, as I just said, the laptop motherboard and the chassis platform are often designed by the manufacturer themselves. So since they are designed by the manufacturers themselves, we can't call those manufacturers EMS, electronic manufacturing services, because EMSs only manufacture the product, they do not design it. So here we have to call them ODMs. So quantum computer compile electronics are not EMS, they are ODMs, because they do part of the design of the laptop as well. So I told you in the beginning that these are not black and white definitions. It exists in a gray area. So the, the design parts of the design might be owned by the brand owner, and parts of it might be owned by the manufacturers themselves. The more complex or the more high end the product is, the more the chances that the design is split between the brand owner and the manufacturer, in which case the manufacturer will be known as an ODM. But when it comes to lower tier products or simpler products, you can see the segregation is higher. Most of the design is done by the brand owner, and or maybe a lot of it is done by the manufacturer themselves, in which case it's again an ODM and it's done most of it by themselves. So that's the key distinction between an ODM and an EMS, is that the ODM owns significant portions of the product design itself, while the EMS company primarily manufactures the designs provided to it by its customer. So that's it for manufacturing and assembly. So the next stage, once manufacturing and assembly is done, is marketing and distribution. So once the product is manufactured, the next stage is branding, marketing and distribution. This is where many of the highest margin activities occur. So the companies that controls the customer perception, the ecosystem integration, their retail relationships, they tend to capture a lot of value in this whole chain. So a company like Apple controls the retail stores, the software ecosystems, the app distribution, the customer support, and so on. So these functions create a pricing power and customer loyalty. So this is one reason why many consumer electronic companies increasingly outsource manufacturing, while they focus most of their time and effort over software, branding, and ecosystem layers, because that is how you can extract more value. By value, I mean extract more price out of the product. So that's briefly the job of marketing and distribution. And finally, we have the stage 5, which is after sales support. So this is the final stage, after sales support and lifecycle management. So this includes warranty support, spare parts, software updates, repair, infrastructure, and so on. So in modern electronics, software support has become increasingly important because products now continue to evolve after sale through firmware and operating system updates. So most of it is done by the brand owners, in terms of, for example, software updates are obviously being done by the brand owners, but then also there are authorized sellers, or sorry, the authorized repair companies that are not actually the brand owners, but they are officially authorized by the brand owners to repair the products, or maybe make the components for them. So this is so after the stage 5 is done either by the brand owners or by the authorized companies that are authorized by the brand owners. So broadly speaking, these are the 5 stages involved in the electronics manufacturing industry, or maybe the electronics products industry. So now that we have a very broad overview about the different processes involved, now I think the definitions of different companies might be easier to understand. So when viewed through the process-based framework, the confusion around the terminology becomes easier to resolve. Now let me just note certain things down. So there are 5 stages. So the companies involved in stage 1, stage 4 and stage 5, these are mostly the brand owners themselves. And moreover, if we talk about stage 5, okay, for stage 5, we might have authorized, apart from brand owners, some of the things might also be done by authorized repair owners. Again, we might also have the logistics might be done by third party. So yes, so those are the things, but majorly stage 1, stage 4 and stage 5 are done by the brand owners themselves. This would be these are companies like Apple, Dell, Xiaomi. If you for Indian brands, it could be brand like Boat. So if you're just to reiterate, stage 1 is product strategy. This one is product strategy. Stage 2 was product design. Stage 3 is manufacturing. Stage 4 is marketing and distribution. Stage 4 is after sales. Okay, so we know who are the companies involved in stage 1, 4 and 5. Now coming to stage 2, there might be different companies involved depending on what you're talking about. So if it's a high-end product, most of it is done by for stage 2. If it's a high-end product, most of it is done by the brand owners themselves, and some of it, as I've just explained in the laptop example, little bit might be done by the manufacturers too. Okay, but if it's a mid to low range product, then both the design plus okay for low to mid products, both the design plus manufacturing is done by the same company, in which case these companies could be called as ODMs. for stage 1, as I've said, if the product is a high-end product plus it's also complex, then the design is done both by the brand owners as well as the manufacturers. So in that case, this manufacturer has to be called ODM, because as long as they are involved in the design process, we have to call them an ODM. Okay. And maybe if for certain products, if all of the design is done by the brand owner, third category, and none of the design is then moved to the manufacturer, then the design is mostly done by the brand owner. Now, I haven't found in my research what kind of products exactly is this, but let's just assume that there's exists certain kinds of products where all of the design are done by the brand owners themselves with no input from the manufacturer. So these are the brand owners. The design are done by the brand owners themselves. So in which case, whoever is doing the manufacturing in this case will be known as EMSs. So now we move to stage 3, manufacturing. So this is very clear from stage 2 itself. If the manufacturer is in any way involved in the design process as well, in that case we will call it manufacturer and ODM. And if it's not involved at the at the design process at any stage and simply it manufactures, then in that case the manufacturer will be an EMS. And in the manufacturing stage, we also told that the components are not directly manufactured by the same ODMs that are assembling the electronic product. Those are procured from other specialist suppliers. So those suppliers, for example, we say that displays are provided by someone else, the memory is provided by someone else. Like for example, the memory could be procured through Micron, the displays by Samsung. So these are called as original equipment manufacturers because they manufacture those specialized components. So those are the EMSs. So far we have figured it out. So I have already talked about marketing and talked about sales. So this is a very broad way of understanding the different players within the electronics manufacturing value chain. Again, as I've said, the definitions exist in a gray area. It's not deterministic and it's not black and white. Depends on very specific scenario. So I hope this will give you a very broad idea about the different players in the electronics manufacturing value chain and the roles played by the different players, and also the different terminologies such as ODMs, EMS, OEMs, brand owners, authorized repair owners, and so on. And I'll admit that this is not a comprehensive description of this industry, but as I have said in the beginning, this is for people who are beginners or someone who is not familiar with this industry and wants to understand it from a big picture point of view. So my objective is that this will help you with that process, and this might be a starting point for you to research this industry in greater details. So I hope you find it helpful.